We're here. We're going to continue to do news. I'm joined with my guest, Andrii Telizhenko. Andrii, man, welcome to the show. I am going to give you an intro. Give me 1 second. The system apparently collapsed when you joined. That's not your fault. That is the system's fault. It does that every random blue moon. But let me give you an intro. Andrii Telizhenko. He is a Ukrainian whistleblower, a former diplomat. Andrii, man, thank you for joining me. How you doing this morning?
Good morning, Jamar. Good morning, everybody. Great to see you again and feeling well. A lot of news is always happening, craziness around the world, and we're trying to understand what is happening there because I myself sometimes sit down and just say, when is this going to end? When are we going to get back to some reality, normal reality where there's going to be peace and no evil around, no craziness? But it seems it's never going to end.
Man, this is terrifying. Like, I feel like, and it's more terrifying than the Cuban Missile Crisis. Like, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, there was respect between the Soviet Union and the US, meaning even though they were at each other's throats, and even though you might have had this kind of clandestine activity in various countries, there was respect. There was this understanding that the world could end, and they was engaged around that thing of, okay, this could end the world, so we need to deal with this with a certain level of respect and credibility that it demands. I don't see that today. They don't, and I don't like the idea that you have somebody like Joe Biden who is not even mentally, cognitively fit enough to run in a race, and yet apparently he still has his finger on the nuclear button, is rather astonishing to me. Keir Starmer has just had a petition to recall him in Britain, where in 24 hours, over 2 million people signed that petition to recall Keir Starmer. He is basically saying he is willing to end the world and end Britain. Macron, who in no way even has a governing majority, has lost 3 elections back to back to back, has still come out saying we are going to put troops or are considering putting troops in Ukraine. These people are deranged. And if we let them, they will end the world. I found this to be astonishing. One point I want to make here, and I want to get your take on this. The Economist has pointed out that at this point, even the majority of Ukrainian soldiers want this to come to an end. Even the majority of Ukrainians, for the first time in Gallup polling, I think it's like 52%, want this conflict to come to an end. And yet, you have Starmer, Biden, and Macron escalating a conflict that Ukrainians themselves want to come to an end. And so, as I've asked this question before, okay, well, what is this about? If Ukraine itself is saying, yeah, we want this to come to an end, and these guys are like, no, we need to escalate, even to the point of ending the world, then I have to say this is not really about Ukraine. Give me your take on this. I mean, what is the political climate in Ukraine right now? Because it's unclear to me. What's going
It
on?
was not, it was never about Ukraine. It was about Russia. Russia, Russia, Russia. Resources. There's some charts around online featuring how much Russia has wealth in its soil, in its land. $75 trillion worth of resources. That is what it's all about. It was never about Ukraine. Ukraine elites sold out to the deep state. But Biden's not controlling the world. Macron or nobody is. All these Western so-called elites, they're being controlled by somebody. The deep state, BlackRock, Obama's, Hillary's, the Clintons, and like whatever you call them. But they have names, Soros, and there's more. But they're not controlled. They're not independent. They're fully controlled. And Ukraine is also not sovereign. The government in Ukraine, which is prolonged, long overdue by the Constitution, is also leading this to World War III. Ukrainians don't want to fight. They understood. Now they understood after what is happening, how much lives are being lost. I'm talking to people on the ground in Ukraine almost every day. I had to flee Ukraine because my life was in danger because the government at that time, Zelensky and Yermak, wanted to kill me. And I left Ukraine, and now I can talk about the truth. But people in Ukraine are afraid to speak out. It's only 52% of the ones who said the truth, who spoke out. But there's more, I can tell you that. There's more than 52% who want peace. It's 60, 70%. We spoke about this before on your shows. And I can tell you, Ukrainians are understanding they were used in all this. Yes, there's 20% of radicals, neo-Nazi, fascists, whatever you call them. They want to fight. They want to. They're being paid to fight against Russia. But most of the men in Ukraine, the military, right now, they're not being paid anything. You know how much is the military getting paid after he gets amputated his legs and arms in Ukraine? The soldier, $35 a month. That's a salary. Russians are getting paid $2,500 a month, $8,000 a signed contract. Ukrainians are not getting paid nothing. The money which is being sent to Ukraine is being laundered and sent back to the West. This is what this war is all about. They want to continue it just to make the money itself. They couldn't get Russia. The first objective was of the war to get the Russian resources, what I talked about at the beginning, $75 trillion worth. They couldn't get it. Now they're trying to make their money's worth of the investment and trying to launder everything they can to make at least get everything out of what they invested the last 10 or 30 years into Ukraine. So this is what it's all about, to get Europe, to break down Europe and put it on gas. And then maybe something will happen in Russia. They will say it was their victory, and they will go in and try to dismantle Russia in 30 different countries and then take over them and take their resources. So this is what it's all about. Ukrainians understood this. They understood this when Oreshnik, when the nuclear missile almost got shot over Ukraine. They saw the capacity of Russian military. They cannot fight it.
Let me ask you this. When Zelensky got elected, he got elected on a peace ticket. I mean, he effectively said, look, I'm going to end the conflict. I'm going to end hostilities with Russia. We're not going to go after the Russian language and all of this stuff. And then when he gets elected, he does a 180 and continues Poroshenko's policies, even the war, like going after the ethnic Russian Ukrainians. Why the switch? Why? Like, how did he go from, I'm going to win an election from the coup government, and I'm going to change this over into bringing down hostilities with Russia, into, okay, now I'm escalating the war, to what the West at this point says he sounds messianic and delusional in continuing this war effort? How did that change? What happened?
He went to the West. He went to London. And in June of 2019, June of 2019, he sold out. He sold out, and he knew that he's going to fight this war. Russia warned everybody. They begged everybody, signed the Minsk agreements. You can have Donbass as an autonomy. Forget about Crimea, and then you'll have peace. There's no civil war in Donbass. We will not go and get their army in there. Everything will be peaceful, because then we will have to protect our people if you don't. Nobody signed the Minsk Accords. They said, even though everybody signed them, but they were ratified in the United Nations, but the government in Ukraine never acknowledged them and never worked on them, even though they lied to everybody that they did. Then to December 21, Russia says Ukraine is going to join NATO. Don't let them join NATO. That's the end. That's the red line. Please sign a document from the West. Nobody's going to join NATO. We're going to continue our lives, and we're going to end this conflict and try to resolve under the Minsk Accords. No, the West again said no. And Zelensky said no, because he was controlled by the West, even though he could have stopped this. And then comes February 2022, the special operation in Ukraine, the Russian military comes in, which I understand their main reason to coming in was for Ukraine to sit down and sign a deal with Russia, which they did in Istanbul, which Russia backed out of Kiev, because they were around Kiev. They were not in Kiev. Any soldiers were not in Kiev, but they were around Kiev. They backed out. And Zelensky signed that deal. They signed it. His representative, the head of the fraction in the parliament of Zelensky, signed that deal with the support of Zelensky, because he gave him a green light. Then Johnson comes in and said, no, that deal is bad. You have to continue to fight this war. But the Russians already backed out, so they wanted peace. But no, the West pushed it. They pushed Ukrainians into this. The propaganda in Ukraine was so terrible, so crazy, that the children on the streets were shouting out swear words against Russia, they were going to kill Russians, and
Really?
the children were involved in this. This is how bad it became. Then they went after the church. Then they went after everybody who was for peace. And this is what we have. This is not democracy. This is not a war, Russia against Ukraine, because Ukraine wanted independence or sovereignty. No, Ukraine had sovereignty and independence. It sold out to the West. Russia just wanted Ukraine not to be anti-Russia on its borders. The same as America would not want somebody like Canada or Mexico to be anti-America on its borders because it's a national security threat.
Well, Andre, that's the irony of it. Like in the U.S., they make this argument that this is about democracy. Okay, well,
there's no democracy in Ukraine at all. There's no democracy.
There are no presidential elections. Political parties have been basically destroyed. Zelensky is called martial law for all intents and purposes. And it is unclear when there would even be a presidential election or if Zelensky would even win that election, which is why I argue there probably is it's not going to be a presidential election. What was going on the ground when, after Zelensky was elected? What happened? I know you said that basically that Zelensky was turned, he was pushed, that he didn't necessarily have the ability to do what he said he was going to do when he got elected.
But he had an ability. He sold out.
Right. You're saying that the propaganda was so intense on the ground that kids were swearing at Russians on the ground. So what? This was ads. This was political rhetoric. I would imagine people like Victoria Nuland got into play. Interestingly enough, I want to go to Victoria Nuland for a bit. Vladimir Klitschko came out and attacked Joe Rogan because Joe Rogan was pissed off, as every American should be, that they're bringing us to the brink of war. Like, it's like if you're an American and you're looking at this and you're saying to yourself, wait a minute, we should all die in nuclear obliteration so you can keep Ukraine in the Western sphere as opposed to it being neutral? That's what we should do. And so when Joe Rogan says this, Klitschko comes out and says, well, he's repeating Russian propaganda.
Klitschko, what I can say, fuck Klitschko.
Well, real quick, Klitschko was one of those people that Victoria Nuland and Jeffrey Pyatt, I believe the guy's name is, on that phone call where they were talking about overthrowing the government of Ukraine, and they said, fuck the EU. That was a famous phone call where they were discussing the overthrow of Ukraine on that phone call weeks before they went through it, overthrew it. And the people who they were going to put into various positions in government that just so happened, coincidentally, ended up in the positions of government that they were talking about in that phone call. Klitschko was one of the people that was mentioned. And there's video of Klitschko talking with Victoria Nuland, and she's handing out cookies to the people overthrowing the government. Just astonishing stuff. What was Klitschko's role in all of this?
What I can say again, and I will continue to say, fuck Klitschko. Sorry for my language, but I cannot say more. That guy who came out, Klitschko, that's the brother of the mayor of Klitschko, who then went to the government. But it doesn't matter. Where is he? Why is he not fighting? He's a big, strong boxer. Why is he not fighting on the front lines? Why is he not there? He was never on the front lines. He's sitting down in Germany and the United States because the both Klitschko brothers are German citizens. They're not Ukrainian citizens, they're German citizens. And they live in the West, the United States and Germany, where all their families are, their children. And he's pushing and talking about Rogan that Joe Rogan that he's saying Russian propaganda. No, and again, Klitschko. Because
Andre, I'm sorry to interrupt.
This is not propaganda.
Wait, let me interrupt 1 second. Yeah. Klitschko did respond to that. Klitschko said, I'm not going to die for Ukraine. I want to live for Ukraine. Basically, I don't want to be on the front lines. I don't want a gun in my hand and going out to kill Russians. I want to live for Ukraine in this cozy, air-conditioned or heated room and put out.
Maidan. Yeah, but like I want to live for Ukraine, but I'm against the war. I'm against anybody fighting for this war. He is pushing to fight for this war. So is his brother, who's a corrupt mayor. He's responsible for all the drug trafficking and prostitution trafficking in Kiev, in the capital. This is what the mayor and the former heavyweight champion boxer is responsible for. Maybe if Schwarzenegger is listening to us, he should know who his friends are. They're responsible for drugs and prostitution in the capital of his so beloved Kiev. So this is what they are. So again, Joe Rogan said the right thing, and I believe so that everybody who's supporting Joe Rogan and everybody who wants to support peace, they don't support people like Klitschko because they should have stop this war. They did nothing to stop this war. They wanted this war because they're making money on this. Nuland, Klitschko was involved from the beginning. He was supposed to be the president. They were pushing him in 2012 for up to the position of the next president of Ukraine. Then, because of his boxing career, he got hit in the head 300 times so bad, the guy cannot put two sentences together. The younger brother can speak more openly. Yeah, he didn't get hit so much, but the older brother, who's the mayor, got hit so many times. I spoke to him. I know Klitschko. He's sorry for my sorry, but when you tell a joke, he laughs after 5 minutes only after you tell the joke. So the guy doesn't understand what he's doing. So they needed these people like Klitschko to be controlled. So is Zelensky. They're controlled easily by the West. They needed those people in the government so they could push them. They're puppets for them. That's why they were pushing. Nuland was pushing him. Nuland doing her dirty work in Ukraine on the ground. I was there. I was during that coup on Maidan. Unfortunately, I was responsible for that. I was young. I thought that when Ukraine had a different path. But then when I grew older and worked in the government, saw what the reality was, I backed out and started fighting and continued this fight for the last 8 years.
Going
And
to
what
that
they're
point,
doing in Ukraine.
you said you were part of it, and you said you were
Unfortunately,
basically,
yes.
you were there seeing the mechanics of it as it was unfolding. The
I
overthrow.
was responsible for all the international coordination work for Maidan at that time, the work with the U.S. Embassy. Jeffrey Pide was on my speed dial. I was there to come out on the Maidan and I was when I would come out, Jeffrey Pide would come in. That was the signal. It was secure for him to come into the Maidan and check what was happening there. Especially there were a couple of buildings who were taken over by the protesters. They were making cocktail Molotovs there. The radical groups were responsible for doing that, and they were throwing them at the police. Jeffrey Pide would come in and inspect everything, say everything's good, and they would basically do it by the book. He would give orders around. Nuland would give orders around what to do. She would swear at the president of Ukraine. I met with Nuland right when she was in Kiev, and she swore so much on the president and so many F words on Yanukovych, who was officially elected and legal president of Ukraine. Why doesn't she swear at Zelensky today? She should come out and swear at him. He's an illegal president by the constitution of our country, which they say respect. Nobody respects Ukraine anymore at all. Ukraine was used as a rag for their dirty work, and they continue to use it, but it's already being destroyed so much. And the people want peace. That's what the people spoke out already. People, can you imagine so much threat, so much propaganda, but these people anyway spoke out. And I can tell you, the 52% is 62 or even 72% who want peace in Ukraine. So that's the result. 6 million fled to Europe. 6 million fled to Russia.
Yeah.
To Russia, and they're being much safer there than in Ukraine. That is what everybody has to understand. That this war is not against Russia and Ukraine. This war is against America, NATO, the West, the deep state. Not America as the people. The people in America are great people. I live in the United States, and I have full respect for the people. But the deep state, which destroyed America. That's why we see the results of the election today, the change of government, and hopefully maybe some stability. I hope so. It's a big chance, but I don't know if it will happen. But I'm just praying. And Russia, which the deep state of Russia trying to make a war, and we are all in between. That's what we have to stop.
Let me ask you this. So this happened under the Obama administration. Joe Biden was vice president. Of course, Nuland, Clinton, all of these people were part of the Obama administration. How did the Democratic Party, how were they involved in this? Because I remember during the election, especially the Hillary Clinton election, they were trying to get dirt on Trump. And they ended up getting dirt on Manafort and his actions that were taking place in Ukraine with the idea of using that to create this kind of congressional investigation to dirty up Trump before the 2016 election. All of this was happening, of course, around the coup time period. How did the Democratic Party, how were they involved in I guess the overthrow, but B, trying to use Ukraine as a way to take Trump down in 2016?
They used the coup in Ukraine to take over Ukraine. The Democrats, the deep state. That's for sure. Susan Rice, Obama, Biden, they all knew what they were doing. Nuland. And they took over Ukraine. Ukraine basically went under them. The elites which they put in were fully controlled by the West. They were all engaged with the Democratic Party, USAID funds, Med funds, NDI, IRY, you name it. All the money laundering that was going through Ukraine was used to be a money laundering machine, and they were put into the West. That's one thing. Second of all, Ukraine was used as a hub for the deep state and the West to fight political wars and have overthrow of governments in former Soviet countries like the Baltics. They had they worked with the opposition from Ukraine, and then in the Baltics, then in Moldova. They basically, the hub for the opposition for Moldova was in Ukraine. The hub for the Kazakhstan opposition was in Ukraine. For Kyrgyzstan, they were all sitting in Kiev, and they were all being saved because they were protected by the West. And Kiev was basically the new Western Berlin, if you can call it. And that was very popular after the coup. All the diplomats I spoke to, they would call Kiev the new Western Berlin. And we're fighting here against Russia, etc., all that nonsense. And they actually believed in that. And then what the Democrats did in the 16-17 election, the presidential election when Trump won, I was working in the Ukrainian embassy in Washington at the time. Mm-hmm. And I was approached by one of the DNC workers, Alexandra Chalupa, that's her name, and she asked me to get dirt on one of the presidential candidates, and at that time, Donald Trump. And we met. I said no. Then I went to our ambassador, Charlie, at that time. Charlie, he said you should obey her orders and basically do what this Chalupa lady tells you. And I was like, this is irresponsible because we're going to play a game only. We cannot play this game because we're going to play a game only on one side. We have to be an embassy. We're diplomats. We have to work with two sides. Right. We can help, advise, maybe on some things, but we cannot intervene in elections. So I was working at the time very closely also with the National Security Council, the White House administration, Liz Zentos. I met Eric Shermanella during the time. I was in the White House a couple of times. During the January meeting, where the prosecutors from Ukraine were meeting with the National Security Council and the Biden administration, talking about Paul Manafort and the Black Ledger. Right. I was there. I went on Fox News on Laura Ingraham's show a couple of years ago, my statement, and also I gave us. It was all investigated by the Federal Election Commission, where I gave a sworn-in statement to the FEC, and after I got sanctioned, they closed down that investigation. They closed down basically, they had no problems with my sworn statement because everything that went in Washington, I was questioned by the Federal Election Commission. I was questioned by the U.S. authorities, and they had no problems with my testimony. They only had a problem after I got sanctioned by the United States government illegally, falsely, by the deep state, by Pompeo, to undermine Trump. Then they went after and then closed down that investigation, another couple of investigations against Blue Star Strategies, who worked with Hunter Biden, which I also gave testimony to and gave some of my information to the United States Senate, which used in their investigation by Senator Johnson and Senator Grass in 2020. So that's what the Democrats were doing. They were laundering money through Ukraine, making a hub for overthrowing governments in the post-Soviet world, and also not only post-Soviet, but also Russia. And they were basically making money on this. They were using Ukraine to do this dirty work against the political rivals, which they tried to do the same thing in this election. And then they had the son of the vice president of the United States making millions of dollars, doing nothing, sitting on drugs, and being the board members on Burisma, which I also testified in the Senate about. And that's why they went after me. And that's why there's no democracy in Ukraine, or I think there's less democracy or no democracy in the United States because they politically try to destroy people who want with the truth, like me. And that's what Ukraine is about. And that's why people in Ukraine were afraid to fight.
Andrii, real quick, we're having a bit of internet difficulties, so forgive me on this if there's a disruption.
No problem.
Let me ask you this. What was your take on Victoria Nuland? Because Nuland, in that conversation with Pyatt, was very clear that we're going to do this before the EU can ever get involved. Ultimately saying F the EU. What was your take on Nuland, and what were some of the conversations you had with her? And I don't necessarily know how involved those conversations were. You can go into it if you can, but what was the take of Nuland?
Very I'm not a very pleasant person. Like I swore today a bit a couple of times, but it was just to get back on some people who are going to World War III. So
Yeah,
I think that's the the least they can get a swear word from me. But Nuland swore just on a regular basis. She's a diplomat. She cannot do that, especially meetings with foreign, not just leaders, but foreign people and foreign personalities. Because I was not just there in the meeting. There was people from like Yatsenyuk there, Klitschko, also who in that meeting with Nuland. I was in that meeting with Nuland.
yeah,
There's only 3 or 4 people from the Ukrainian side. I was one of them. There was Yatsenyuk, Klitschko, Technibok, and me. And there was Nuland, Pyatt, and the U.S. Embassy. We were meeting in the Hyatt in December of 2013, and Nuland was trying to call Yanukovych throughout the night because the police tried to storm Maidan, and Yanukovych basically did not pick up the phone until 4 a.m. So she comes into the meeting and tells this all to us, and she's like, "Oh, fuck him, this, fuck Yanukovych, that, he's nothing, he's nobody." And she very unpleasant, like for a woman to swear like this. I don't know. She said she was on a Russian ship in the 90s. I don't know, maybe something happened to her there, but she doesn't like Russia that much, and she swears that much. But very unpleasant for me to person, very aggressive and very negative personality. I said, I met with different people from the United States. Madeleine Albright, she's not a good person, but you didn't have that feeling from her, a very negative feeling from her. But from Nuland, as soon as you meet her, there's a very negative uh,
yeah. You can look at her.
energy
Yeah, you can
that
look
her
at her.
that
I've seen some of
yeah.
her
So
videos.
it's
She
very
is
unpleasant.
a cantankerous person. She is a boil. Anytime you see her, usually there's going to be some kind of overthrow attempt, some kind of color revolution. Anytime she's deployed. No, I agree with you on that. You mentioned
We should
Tynabuk.
send her on a ship and set her to sail in the Pacific. Let her
Agreed.
be
That
wherever she be.
the world would be better off. The world would be better off. You mentioned Tynabuk, so you were engaged with him too. He is a neo-Nazi, correct?
Yeah, I was engaged with him. He was part of the Maidan
Maidan.
coup.
Right.
He was one of the leaders of that so-called overthrow government, and I was there as a representative of all of them, meeting with the U.S. Embassy because the U.S. Embassy and the PI personally asked me to organize that meeting for them because I was the point man for all the international work. So I know what they were doing in Ukraine, all the dirty work during Maidan. It was a fully orchestrated, financed by the United States government uh, action against or political action against Ukraine and Ukraine against the legal precedent. So that's what they were doing there. They were fully working, coordinating everything, and every leader, a political leader from the Yatsenyuk, Klitschko to lower ones, would coordinate their work with the U.S. or British embassy. They would
And
have
just
all
and real
visas
quick,
and passports. Yeah,
just to be clear, this was
2013,
under the
14.
government, meaning you have the Yanukovych government that was in play. That was the democratically elected government. And these ambassadors, these people who were in opposition parties, they were working against the government of Ukraine to take
Yeah,
down that government.
right under the nose of the government. And if that government was so dictatorship, like I think, like with Zelensky, we would all get shot right on the street. But it was democracy in Ukraine then, and we thought it wasn't. We wanted something more. Unfortunately, I said it was the biggest mistake in my life to be part of that, but it gave me a lot of knowledge when I came to the government to see what really Ukraine was happening in Ukraine, and I think it gave me the strength to come out and tell the truth in 2016, 17. And since then, I've been fighting this battle against the deep state, against Nuland. I was on their side. I could have been there. I could have not come out and had my government position, had a U.S. passport. I was offered a U.S. passport by the U.S. Embassy in Kiev a couple of times. I did not take it. I said I'm a Ukrainian citizen. I'm going to fight for Ukraine, and I thank God I stayed in my position. Thank God that I took the right path, even though I got hit for it so much. I had to flee Ukraine. I'm under U.S. sanctions, under Ukrainian sanctions. I cannot get a bank account, get a job, normal job, whatever. But I am happy that I did it because I have no blood on my hands. I came out with the truth, not getting Ukraine engaged in this war, and I was fighting for Ukraine not to be part of this war. But the U.S. and all the foreign governments were using Ukraine right in the nose of instead of a legitimate president to make an overthrow of government. And what Russia is saying is fully true. It's all of it. It's true that Ukraine was used. Ukraine was used to topple the elites were used to topple the Yanukovych government. The U.S. came in and started to build an anti-Russia right in by the nose of Russia, trying to get Ukraine into NATO, even though Ukraine was never been to NATO. But they were putting bases, military bases, in Odessa, in Kherson, and Mykolaiv, in southern Ukraine. There were military bases from Canada, Britain, United States, already in Ukrainian soil, even though it's illegal to do that because they're never ratified to do it. There are CIA bases in the West. There are biological labs for the United States government. I had reports when I was, after the coup, I became the advisor to the first deputy prime minister of Ukraine and on overseeing the law enforcement and the intel community in
Yeah.
Ukraine. And I saw those reports on the biolabs in Odessa. One of the most crazy biolabs I ever saw in that report, because there was more than 1,000 birds in that region, which when they are migrating, and they're taking all those biomaterial from them and making it into a weapon. All those biomaterial from 1,000 different birds from around the globe, which they have all those diseases which they're carrying, and they're basically taking them and putting them into a laboratory and making a chemical weapon against our humanity. This is what the U.S. is doing on Ukrainian soil. And when people are saying it's a conspiracy theory, no, it's not. It's not a conspiracy theory. And that's what the United States was doing in using Ukraine from the beginning. Then came the political.
Yesterday, I believe, of Nuland talking about the biolabs. Marco Rubio asked her about it. Says, hey, the Russians are talking about biolabs in Ukraine. And Nuland was like, yeah, we need to get that stuff out of there because of so-and-so. And Rubio even pointed out, he says, but if anybody mentioned the stuff, that's Russian propaganda, right? She says, yes, that is totally Russian propaganda, despite the fact that she had just admitted to the labs being there and admitting to trying to get that stuff out of those labs. I have no idea what is in those labs, but she is the one that mentioned that they were there. So
I just told you what was in one of them. There was more than a dozen of them, but I think was one of the crazy ones, which I saw information on 2014. That was in 2014. That's the lab that that was doing. What it was doing today, I don't know. I know that from my information, some of them are still there and still controlled by the United States. And unfortunately, this is what this war is about: proxy war. And as I said, Joe Rogan again was right to call them out on this.
Before I let you go, because we're coming to the hour, we have about 5 minutes, give or take. What do you think Trump is going to do? Like, do you think Russia is saying that they don't necessarily believe Trump is going to end the war, or at the very least, they don't believe he's going to have the leeway, the flexibility to end the war, even though Trump has said pretty clearly, the idea that this is a nuclear war is problematic. We need to bring down hostilities. What is your hope that Trump does, and what do you believe he's going to do? And those are two different questions, meaning what do you believe he's going to do when he comes into office, but what do you want him to do when he comes in office? And speaking as a representative of Ukraine, for the most part, you're effectively saying this war needs to stop. Give me your take. What are your thoughts?
I believe that Trump is one of the most independent candidates. This was the most independent candidate who could have done and stopped this war. Mm-hmm. I still believe that he might do something to stop this, or at least put it to an end or a pause, not to escalate it into World War III. That is my take. If he stops it completely in the right way, I think he'll be blessed by everybody around the globe, by real people, normal people, not the elites. But he needs to stop it. He almost got shot twice during this campaign.
I know.
He needs to understand that he had some sign from God that he needs to be a peacemaker, and not a peacemaker, not just push U.S. interests in this situation, even though I understand he will push U.S. interests. He is a deal maker from the United States. He's a businessman, a U.S. businessman. That's it. But today, this war was started by the West, and he needs to end it from the West. That's my point of view. What he needs to do first, and as I said, I think he can stop it. He has all the right abilities to do it. and hopefully the right people to do it. But what he needs to do to really stop it, he needs to the first action to talk about not first the U.S. interest, but the interest of people on the ground, not getting them killed more and more, because over 1 million deaths from the Ukrainian side, the Ukrainian military lost over 1 million soldiers already, which is a terrible situation. Russia is also losing hundreds, thousands of soldiers on their side. But this has to stop from a people point of view. That's one thing. He needs to talk about it, not a U.S. president, but a person who wants peace. And he cannot just call Putin and from an aggressive or U.S. standpoint of view said, I'm the president of the United States, you have to stop it. No, the United States has no capability of doing it at this point today. It has a $36 trillion debt. They cannot just call up and say we want somebody to stop a war right away on our terms. No, it has to be on terms of peace, which the United States started this war. They need to take out all their foreign intel out of Ukraine. CIA, NSA, military intelligence, whatever. There's 60 intel groups in the United States. All of them are working in Ukraine. Get them out of there right away. As soon as he becomes president, he appoints all of his cabinet members. Get all those intel groups out. Get all those foreign advisors who are on the Ukrainian soil today illegally. Get them out of Ukraine. Get all the foreign troops who are working, also fighting under Zelensky's side. Get them out of Ukraine, and then start peace negotiations. Then Ukraine will also have a possibility to be a neutral state and talk about peace. Only leave the U.S. embassy there and the diplomatic corps from abroad, whatever. That's official. Everything
Yeah, I don't
unofficial.
think the diplomacy part. I think it's with the war part. Like from my point of view, this is a catastrophe. Like you're like we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people dead purely because the U.S. decides that it wants to bring Ukraine into its orbit, as opposed to Ukraine being an independent state. And when I say independent state, it was the Yanukovych government, whatever anybody thinks of it, was elected by the East and the West, meaning Eastern ethnic Russian Ukrainians in the East and Ukrainians in the West. It was a government that was decided upon. And when you get this overthrow, it means the legitimate government of the country had fallen. And
Yeah.
when people talk about January 6th here in the United States, they don't talk about it as a potential revolution. They talk about it as a potential coup. And it's amazing to me that it's like, okay, so you recognize what was taking place in January 6th as a potential coup, but you don't recognize the Maidan coup as a coup. You call it a revolution of dignity. It's astonishing to me, like this disconnect between something that happens to us versus something that is happening to somebody else. One last point. You mentioned Donald Trump nearly being shot. So do you believe that, where do you believe that nearly came from, that assassination attempt? Are you saying that you think, let me try to explain this. You bring it up in the context of Trump ending the war. Do you think they were trying to kill him to prevent him from that potential of ending the war?
I believe so. Yes, that was the signal for him, or they wanted to take him out, so they will still continue this war, because this war is billions and billions of dollars, and a person's life to them is nothing, even if it's the U.S. citizen, or even if it's a former U.S. president or a future U.S. president. We saw what they did to Kennedy. We just had the anniversary of his death a couple of days ago. Throughout U.S. history, the U.S. presidents could have were gone after and killed. Some of them went on their own, like Nixon understood that he could have his next thing would have, they could have shot him also if he would not leave on his own. So here, I think Trump, they wanted to kill him because they want him to continue this war, because they understood that he would win this election, and they could not falsify it as they did in 2020, because there was too many people for him in this election. That's what I believe. So I'm not trying to be on somebody's side, but I do support President Trump in this situation. I will support him until he will try to stop this war. If he will not, I will have a different point of view. But right now, there's still a hope that he can do it. And as I said, for him to, before he even makes a phone call to President Putin, he needs to get all the U.S. intel groups out of Ukraine. He needs to get all the foreign advisors out of Ukraine. Only leave the U.S. embassy. Leave Ukraine alone from the U.S. hands, Take your U.S. hands out of the Ukrainian throat, and then it will be easier to negotiate with Russia. You'll save millions of lives, and then focus on something else. For as a Ukrainian, I'm asking to leave Ukraine alone to the United States. Do not touch us.
I deeply appreciate your point of view. Look, Trump lost in 2020, and he lost because of COVID. If it wasn't for COVID, he probably would have won that election. This election, he did win, and he even won the popular vote. And I suspect part of that vote was we're at the brink of war. Like we're at the brink and the threshold of nuclear war. And we need to stop. And we'll see what Trump does. I mean, look, it seems that Joe Biden is trying to escalate before Donald Trump gets in office and to get us into something before Trump gets in. And I suspect that Biden is probably also unclear on what Trump is going to do, but he knows that Trump ran on this notion of we're going to end the war, we're going to end the war. I mean, hell, even RFK Jr. and Trump Jr. ends up writing an editorial effectively saying we need to end this war. So from your mouth to God's ears. But we'll see. Man, thank you for this. I really appreciate you joining me on this. I'm going to bring you back to extend this conversation because I got to be honest, it's something that people need to hear. Because what they hear in this country is just overt propaganda from the mainstream media outlets about how the war started, what Putin is trying to do, Ukraine is a democracy, et cetera, et cetera. And as I pointed to before, I care more about what's real. Andrii Telizhenko, he is a Ukrainian whistleblower and former diplomat. Thank you for this, man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jamal. I really appreciate it and hope God bless and all the best to you and your viewers.
Have a good one, man. Be safe. All right.